Blessings. When we talk about blessings, we're talking about one of those parts of the Bible and one of those parts of the fabric of Christianity that we hear, that we receive, that we give to others. But sometimes, maybe I would say even often, we don't fully appreciate the great power they speak of or of the great responsibility that they bring with them. But today, I really think we have an opportunity to be reminded of that power. See, this gospel from Mark picks up right from where Jesus' provocation with the Pharisees left us last week. He was calling them out for being hypocrites who cared more about the religious law, and specifically the religious laws that were instituted by man and not by God. And they were caring far more for those than they were for the actual people that law was written to help. And then immediately afterwards, we find ourselves in a very, I think, difficult situation as we get to this story of a young girl's exorcism. See, it's not seemingly difficult for Jesus to perform this miracle. In fact, it appears that he doesn't really need to do anything at all besides think she should be healed, and she's healed. Jesus never says anything out loud. He never verbally says, the power of Christ compels you. Nothing of that happens. Instead, this is a miracle that really seems quite easy for Jesus to do. But the difficulty in this text is that Jesus doesn't seem willing to do it at first. He doesn't seem willing to do anything, in fact, in the face of this woman's pleas for help. And there are layers to this gospel, things that are important for us to fully understand what is happening around us. And first of all, Jesus is not on home turf here in this gospel. He is north from his home region of Galilee, and he's in an area of predominantly Greek people in the region of Tyre. And secondly, it seems like in this gospel, Jesus is just trying to take a vacation. The gospel clearly says he enters the house in secret, and he doesn't want anyone to know that he's there. But what happens? The secret gets out, and here comes this woman. And she's an insider to this region. She's Greek by birth. It also specifically says that she's Phoenician. And for those who don't know, Phoenician would be an ethnicity that has had some history with the Hebrew people in the past. They were great shipbuilders, and there were often some disputes between the kings of Israel and the kings of Phoenicia. And she begs Jesus. She comes and falls down before him on her knees and begs, please cast this unclean spirit out of my daughter. She begs that he would make her daughter whole again, that he would give her a blessing of healing. But in response to this, and this is where it gets difficult, Jesus doesn't act. He doesn't heal. He gives her no blessing. Instead, he says to her, first, let the children eat all they want, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. I just want to pause right there. Just let that statement sink in, because it's a hard one to hear. This sounds like something the Pharisees would say. This does not sound like what Jesus should be talking about. And before this line in Matthew's reading, this is from Mark, remember, but in Matthew's reading, Matthew feels it needs a little more explanation, so he inserts this statement that says Jesus was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. But Mark doesn't do that. He lets the words fall without any extra explanation. There is no justification that he is not there for her, just a straight denial of her request for aid. And I wonder what our gospel would be like if this story ended right there. Where would our gospel be? What kind of a gospel would we have if this daring mother never stood up to say, wait a second? What would it tell us about God's purpose if she just walked away in that moment? See, the message of the children and the dogs is a message of scarcity. It's a message of selective blessing, of favoritism. It says, I can't help you because I don't think there's enough to go around. And it's a message that I think we hear far too often in our world. The message of us first, you second. We'll take care of things here at home, and then we'll worry about our neighbors. See, it's a gospel that's split by tribalism, by party politics and favoritism. And let me be completely clear. Any gospel that is not good news for all is not good news for any. And this lone Gentile woman, who has literally overstepped her bounds, who has overstepped every social norm. She's a woman who comes to Jesus alone in a home. That was not allowed. She is a Gentile. He is a Jew, also not allowed. But she comes to Jesus with nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to and begs him, please, please. See, this is a woman who believes that Jesus is better than the words that he speaks to her. That the gospel, the good news, is better than these words. And she replies to him in that moment, "Sir, even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the table." And it's as if this woman somehow looks back in time a little bit, sees that just in chapter 6, right before this passage, Jesus takes 5 loaves and a couple of fish and feeds 5,000 people with baskets left over. And she looks at him and says, "You're telling me you don't have any crumbs? With everything that you've done, with everything that you're going to do, you don't have anything to spare for us." It's a convicting statement. And you know what? It works. And it reminds me of a scene in a movie that I like quite a lot. If anyone has ever seen the Christopher Nolan film Batman Begins, there's a scene in it where Bruce Wayne, and spoilers for those who have not seen it, Bruce Wayne is Batman, spoilers, his mansion is set on fire and a beam falls, trapping him on the ground. And it's at this moment that his ever-stalwart butler, Alfred, comes to his aid, and seeing him struggling to lift this thing and free himself, he asks him, "What is the point of all of those push-ups if you can't even lift a bloody log? What's the point?" And here in this passage, it's as if this woman is asking Jesus, what is the point of all of that power? What is the point of all of that blessing? What is the point of all of those other miracles if you can't heal my daughter now? And maybe it was her desperation, maybe it was her fear, maybe it was her anger. We'll never know what drove her to this. But what we do know, what we can rest assured in knowing, is that this woman reminded Jesus of his greater purpose. She held him to the mark of who he was and what he was meant to do. That his power, his blessing was meant for all peoples, not just the selected few. Because God's blessing was always, always meant to be a blessing for all. And the Bible is clear on that. In Genesis, as God calls Abraham to be his chosen people, God blesses him and says, "May you be a blessed nation, that all nations would be blessed through you." Later, as God calls the prophets to retell Israel of this relationship, of this covenant with God, they remind again and again that you are a nation that is blessed so that you may bless others. And as Jesus even was presented in the temple, a righteous man named Simeon exclaims, "My eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel." Jesus embodies that very blessing. And he does it as he tells this woman to return home because your daughter is now free. Jesus, who said initially, "I can't help you," changes his mind. And he doesn't just change his mind with this one instance. No, what's interesting is that as he continues going on, he moves from there, not back to Jewish lands, not back to Galilee, but to the Decapolis, to the 10 Greek cities that are north of Galilee. And there he gives hearing and speech to a man who by all accounts is considered a Gentile. And then he goes on from there. And after 4,000 Gentiles are following after him for 3 days and are hungry, he looks to his disciples and says, "We need to feed them too." See, the words of this woman inspired Jesus that whatever limits might have been placed on the gospel, they were not aligned with God's blessing. And we here today, we are a living legacy of that decision. We are here because Jesus chose that all should benefit. That Jesus came not only for the lost of Israel, but for you and for me. That his life of blessing poured out on all of those who would seek to follow after him. And if we are recipients of God's great blessing in Jesus, we are also called to be a blessing for others. That if we have been so generously given God's blessing, then we are called to share it. See, this is the model of stewardship. This is what it means to be blessed by God's hand, is that all that we carry, all that we own, all that we claim is a gift meant to be shared. That we are to be generous in the giving of our time, of our talents, of our resources, so that as we take a moment to share this gift with others, more than just we ourselves are blessed. And so today, as we stop and bless some bags, which might seem like a pretty unusual maybe, or maybe not as important piece of the things around us, we remember that we are blessed with so many great gifts, and that these bags are a reminder that as we have been blessed, we are to use our gifts in service to others. No matter who they are, no matter what their nationality, no matter what their ethnicity, no matter their social status, that we are called to bless as we have been blessed. And so may the richness of God's blessings be upon you today, that your life would be a life of blessing for this world. Amen.